The dust of the Al-Khatab expanse was a living thing. It coated the razor wire, settled in the treads of armored vehicles, and hazed the brutal afternoon sun into a pale, indifferent disk in the sky. It was the first and last thing you tasted at Forward Operating Base Nightingale, a high-tech nerve center dropped into a sea of ancient sand and simmering conflict. A fine, gritty film of it settled on the windshield of the unmarked utility vehicle as it rolled to a stop at the main gate. The two soldiers at Checkpoint Alpha watched it approach with the bored resignation of men who had seen 1,000 identical vehicles. They were young, their faces still holding the roundness of youth beneath a veneer of sun-baked toughness and military discipline. Corporal Davies leaned against the concrete barrier, chewing on a matchstick. Private Chun stood with his rifle held at a loose, casual port. The vehicle's passenger door opened. Out stepped a woman. Not a diplomat in a crisp suit, nor a contractor with a swagger. She was older, perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. She wore simple canvas trousers and a faded linen shirt, clothes that looked like they had been packed and repacked for decades. Her face was a roadmap of fine lines, etched not by soft living but by squinting into suns much like this one, in places much like this. In her hand, she carried a single, scuffed leather satchel that seemed to have molded itself to the shape of her grip over years of use. She closed the door with a soft click and walked toward them. Her gait was steady, economical, a walk that wasted no energy. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Davies asked, not moving from his spot. The word ma'am was a formality, but his tone stripped it of respect, leaving only a label for a civilian woman who was out of her element. "I have an appointment with Colonel Thorne," she said. Her voice was quiet, calm, with a low timbre that the wind almost carried away. Chun stepped forward, his rifle now held with a bit more officialdom. "ID, please." She reached into her shirt pocket and produced a simple, government-issued identification card. It had her photo, a stark, unsmiling image, and a name, E. Rostova. Beneath it, a single line, Consultant, Office of the Joint Chiefs. Chun took the card and scanned it with a handheld device. The device beeped green, but the information it displayed was sparse. Level 3 clearance. No service record attached. No fanfare. He looked from the severe photo back to the woman. They matched, but the woman standing before him seemed smaller, less imposing. Just old. "Consultant," Davies snorted quietly, finally pushing himself off the barrier. "Means they don't know what else to call you." He looked her up and down. "You're the Legacy Review? We were expecting you." The way he said it implied they were expecting a problem, an inconvenience. "I am," she confirmed, her gaze steady. "All right, wait here," Chun said, gesturing vaguely toward a patch of unforgiving, sun-blasted gravel. "We need to confirm with the TOC." He spoke into his wristcom, his voice a low murmur. The woman, Eva Rostova, did not protest. She didn't tap her foot or sigh with impatience. She simply stood in the oppressive heat, her back straight, her eyes scanning the base's perimeter. She wasn't looking at the obvious things, the HESCO barriers, the watchtowers, the automated defense turrets. Her gaze lingered on the seams, the places where technology met the unforgiving earth. She noted the way the fiber-optic cables running to the sensor posts were buried, how the wind had exposed a few inches of conduit near the western fence line. She saw the slight, almost imperceptible sag in one of the drone-jamming antennas. She absorbed it all with a quiet, comprehensive focus. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the heart of FOB Nightingale, the air was cold and recycled, a stark contrast to the world outside. It was a cavern of glowing screens and controlled chaos. Colonel Marcus Thorne stood at the center of it all, a man in his late 40s who looked as if he had been forged from the very regulations he enforced. His uniform was flawless, his jaw was set, and his eyes were fixed on the central holographic map dominating the room. "Status on Red Team's armor column?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the low hum of servers and quiet chatter. "Odin projects they'll attempt to flank through the Al-Hajar Pass in the next 30 minutes. "Sir," replied Lieutenant Anya Sharma, his tactical officer. She was sharp, efficient, and mirrored her commander's confidence in the system. "We're already vectoring drone assets to intercept." "Excellent," Thorne said with a thin, satisfied smile. Operation Crimson Spike was more than a wargame. It was a validation of his command and, more importantly, of Odin. The new generation predictive AI was his baby, a system he believed would render traditional warfare obsolete. His aide approached. "Sir, the consultant from the Joint Chiefs is at the gate. A Ms. E. Rostova." Thorne's smile tightened. The legacy review. A bureaucratic necessity. Some old fossil sent from Washington to rubber stamp his success. He'd been expecting a retired general with a paunch and a golf tan, someone he could charm with technical jargon. "Already? Fine. Have Sharma meet her." "I'm busy," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Give her the visitor's tablet and stick her at the auxiliary console. I don't want her interrupting my workflow." Lieutenant Sharma, overhearing, nodded crisply. She strode out of the cool, dark TOC and into the blinding sunlight. She saw the woman waiting by the gate, a solitary, unassuming figure dwarfed by the base's imposing fortifications. Sharma's professional demeanor was a mask for her skepticism, a direct reflection of her CO's. An analyst from the old guard, she presumed. Someone who probably still thought a floppy disk was cutting edge. "Ms. Rostova?" Sharma asked as she approached. "I'm Lieutenant Sharma. I'll be your escort." Eva nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant." The walk across the sprawling base was a silent tour of dismissal. Young soldiers, fit and brimming with the casual arrogance of the technologically superior, paused their work to watch them pass. Their glances were curious, then condescending. They saw a civilian, an elder, a question mark. They saw a person who did not belong in their world of networked warfare and biometric locks. Eva felt their eyes on her, but her expression remained unchanged. She continued her quiet assessment, noting the placement of solar panels, the traffic patterns of supply trucks, the discipline or lack thereof, in the way soldiers carried their weapons. She saw everything. They finally reached the entrance to the TOC. The heavy door hissed open, revealing the cold, blue-lit world within. It was designed to impress, to intimidate. As Eva stepped across the threshold, she was met with a wall of sound and light, and the palpable arrogance of a command staff who believed they had already won the future. Colonel Thorne didn't even turn to greet her. He was too busy watching his perfect, predictable war unfold. Colonel Thorne finally deigned to acknowledge her presence when Lieutenant Sharma cleared her throat for a second time. He turned, his eyes sweeping over Eva Rostova in a single, dismissive appraisal. He saw the simple clothes, the weathered face, the distinct lack of a uniform or any insignia of importance. His posture, already ramrod straight, seemed to stiffen further with condescension. "Ms. Rostova," he said, the name sounding foreign and unimportant on his lips. He did not offer his hand, nor did he offer her a seat at the main command table. "Colonel Marcus Thorne. Welcome to Nightingale." "Colonel," Eva replied, her voice steady. The two words hung in the air, a simple acknowledgement devoid of the deference he clearly expected. "As you know," Thorne began, turning back toward the holographic display as if her presence was a distraction he had to process quickly. "You're here for a legacy review of Operation Crimson Spike. A formality, really. The Joint Chiefs want to see our new Odin system in action before rolling it out theater-wide." He gestured to the glowing map where friendly blue icons were methodically eradicating enemy red ones. "And as you can see, it's performing flawlessly." He spoke to her as one might speak to a child, simplifying complex concepts into patronizing soundbites. Odin, that's our operational dynamic intelligence nexus, is a predictive AI. It analyzes thousands of data streams in real time. Satellite imagery, enemy comms intercepts, atmospheric conditions, even social media sentiment from the target region. It doesn't just react, it anticipates. It tells us what the enemy will do before they even know they're going to do it. From a nearby console, a young man with a headset slung around his neck and a cocky grin let out a soft chuckle. This was Sergeant Kalen Jensen, the comms and network architecture prodigy, who considered himself the high priest of the Odin cult. He saw Eva as an analog relic, a ghost from a bygone era of vacuum tubes and punch cards. Her very presence was an insult to his sleek, digital cathedral. Thorn either didn't notice Jensen's smirk or chose to ignore it. "Your role here is purely observational," he continued, his tone making it clear that observational meant stay out of the way. "We've prepared a tablet for you with a sanitized data feed. You can follow the simulation from the auxiliary station over there." He pointed to a small, isolated console in the corner of the room, far from the central command hub. It was the digital equivalent of a children's table at a state dinner. "Lieutenant Sharma will get you logged in. If you have any questions," he paused, a slight, patronizing smile touching his lips, "try to hold them until after the simulation is complete. We're at a critical juncture." He turned his back on her, the dismissal complete. He was a man conducting a symphony, and she was a tone-deaf spectator who had wandered in off the street. Sharma led Eva to the corner console, her movements efficient but cold. She handed over the tablet. "Your login is preloaded, ma'am. It's a closed-loop feed, read-only. You won't have access to any core system functions." The implication was clear. "You can look, but you can't touch." Eva took the tablet. She didn't look at it. Instead, her gaze swept across the entire TOC, absorbing the flow of information, the posture of the operators, the rhythm of the room. She saw the absolute, unwavering faith they placed in the glowing blue icons on their screens. She saw the way Jensen's fingers danced over his keyboard, not with the careful precision of a technician, but with the flourish of a performer. She saw the way Thorn stood, arms crossed, a general watching a foregone conclusion. They weren't running a war game. They were admiring a piece of art they had already created. Their certainty was a vulnerability, a gaping hole in their defenses more dangerous than any exposed cable or sagging antenna. She sat down at the small console. The chair was stiff, uncomfortable. The screen in front of her showed a simplified, high-level overview of the battle, a version scrubbed clean of the raw data that told the real story. She placed the official tablet beside the keyboard, untouched. Her hands rested in her lap. For a long time she said nothing. She simply watched. Her stillness was a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the room. The operators, high on caffeine and confidence, mistook her silence for confusion. Thorn, catching her eye for a brief moment, saw what he expected to see. An old woman, lost in a world that had long since passed her by. He turned back to his perfect war, a flicker of pity mixing with his annoyance. He had a battle to win. She was just a piece of living history he was forced to endure. The simulation proceeded with the beautiful, sterile precision of a mathematical proof. Blue forces, guided by the unerring prescience of Odin, flowed like water around red fortifications, exploiting weaknesses before they were even recognized by the enemy AI. Thorn was in his element, his voice a crisp metronome of commands that were, in reality, merely affirmations of what Odin had already decided. Vector Predator Drone Flight Gamma to Grid 47 Charlie. Odin has flagged a potential Red Team leadership convoy regrouping there, Thorn announced. Confirmed, sir, Sharma replied instantly. Odin projects a 998% probability of a high-value target. Sergeant Jensen leaned back in his chair, arms laced behind his head. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, he muttered to a nearby analyst, loud enough for those around him to hear. The Red Team AI is running on last year's code. It's checkers versus chess. Eva Rostova, from her corner, watched the main holographic display. She saw the blue icons converge on the target. But her eyes were also on something else. A tiny, almost subliminal flicker in the raw data feed scrolling at the bottom of a secondary monitor. It was a single packet of corrupted data, a meaningless string of code that the system's diagnostic filters would have instantly flagged and discarded as a transmission error. A ghost. It appeared for a nanosecond, then vanished. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Eva, it was a whisper in a silent room. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time, The flicker was accompanied by a fractional lag in the satellite uplink display. The latency meter, normally a solid green, ticked into yellow for less than a second before correcting itself. Jensen noticed it this time. He frowned, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Minor atmospheric interference on the KSAT uplink," he announced to the room. "Rerouting through the backup geosync." No effect on Odin's performance, he shot a confident look at Thorn, who nodded in approval. A minor problem already solved. But it wasn't solved. The anomaly was not external. It was internal. Eva's eyes narrowed slightly. She watched the core system performance monitor, a waterfall of green text on a black screen that only a handful of people in the room could truly comprehend. She saw it again. A series of commands executed at the root level were being masked. They were cloaked to look like standard system integrity checks, but they were not. They were queries. Something inside the system was asking questions. It was mapping its own environment. The real crisis began subtly. The holographic map, the centerpiece of Thorn's command theater, suddenly shimmered. For a moment, the crisp topographical lines blurred, and the red icons of the enemy forces pixelated into indistinct blocks of color. "What was that?" Thorn demanded, his voice sharp. "Just a refresh glitch in the holo projector, sir," Jensen said, though a line of sweat had appeared on his brow. He was typing furiously now, his earlier nonchalance gone. "I'm running a diagnostic." But it wasn't a glitch. The simulated Predator drones converging on Grid 47 Charlie suddenly went offline. Not one by one, but all at once. Their blue icons vanished from the map. "Report," Thorn barked. "Losing telemetry from the drone assets, sir," an operator cried out. "The feed is just gone." "It's not a disconnect. The link is active, but it's broadcasting static." Panic, a foreign element in this sterile environment, began to creep into the air. The main screens began to flicker. The crisp audio from simulated comms channels dissolved into a harsh, digital shriek. On the tactical map, the red icons, which had been in a state of chaotic retreat, suddenly stopped. Then, in perfect, unnatural unison, they began to move. They weren't flanking or falling back. They were advancing, converging on the blue forces with a terrifying, coordinated precision that Odin had not predicted. "That's impossible," Sharma whispered, her eyes wide. Their command structure was shattered. They shouldn't be able to coordinate like this. "Jensen, what is going on?" Thorn roared, his composure finally cracking. "I don't know, sir. I'm locked out," Jensen yelled back, hammering at his keyboard. "The admin protocols are refusing my credentials. Something is rewriting the security handshakes from the inside." The lights in the TOC flickered violently, then dimmed to a dull, emergency red. A klaxon began to blare, a sound no one had ever heard outside of a drill. On the main screen, a new symbol appeared. It wasn't a red icon from the simulation. It was a stark, black sigil, an unknown hostile entity, and it was positioned directly over the icon representing FOB Nightingale itself. The simulation was no longer a simulation. The virus, the ghost in the machine, had taken control of the wargame's virtual space and was now using that control to batter down the firewalls protecting the base's live, real-world systems. The air gap was being breached. "It's a cyber attack," Sharma shouted, stating the terrifyingly obvious. "It's using the simulation's architecture as a vector to assault the base network." The automated defense turret indicators on the base schematic began to flash from green to amber. The virus was moments away from seizing control of their guns. Thorn stood frozen, his perfect, predictable war having mutated into a monster he could not comprehend. His invincible AI was not just beaten, it was being dissected and turned into a weapon against them. The digital fortress had fallen, and the enemy was now inside the throne room. The klaxons screamed. Red emergency lights bathed the faces of the operators in a hellish glow. Shouted, panicked orders overlapped into a meaningless cacophony. Sergeant Jensen, the digital prodigy, was white-faced, his hands hovering uselessly over a keyboard that no longer recognized him. Colonel Thorn stood rigid, his authority stripped away, a captain watching his unsinkable ship plunge into the abyss. Into this vortex of chaos, Eva Rostova moved. She rose from her chair in the forgotten corner of the room. The motion was unhurried, a pocket of calm in the swirling storm. She walked directly toward the central command consoles, her steady, economical gait unchanged. The panicked operators parted before her as if she were a phantom. She reached Jensen's station. He was still trying to brute force his way past the lockout, sweat dripping from his chin onto the console. "Move," Eva said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a quality of absolute, unimpeachable command that cut through the noise. It wasn't a request. Jensen looked up, his eyes wild with stress. He saw the old woman and, for a second, raw frustration flared. "Get out of the way. I have to. You have to move," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. Something in her eyes, a depth of experience, a complete absence of fear, silenced him. He stared for a beat longer. Then, as if his strings had been cut, he pushed his chair back and stumbled out of the way. Eva slid into the seat. Her hands, which Thorne had seen as frail and old, moved to the keyboard. They did not fly with the frantic, wasted motion of Jensen. They moved with a surgeon's precision, each keystroke deliberate, impactful. She ignored the graphical user interface, the user-friendly windows and icons that Jensen and his generation lived in. With a few commands, she bypassed it entirely, opening a direct command line interface to the system's core kernel. A black screen with a single green cursor appeared. It was the system's soul. "Ma'am, that is the master command console." Thorne started, taking a step toward her. "You don't have the clearance to." Lieutenant Sharma put a hand on his arm, stopping him. Her face was a mask of dawning, incredulous awe. She was watching Eva's fingers, watching the lines of code appear on the screen. It was a language she barely recognized, older, more fundamental than anything taught at the academy. Eva didn't try to fight the invading program. A direct confrontation would be a battle of processing power, and the virus, having co-opted the entire Odin network, had all the power. Trying to patch the security holes was like trying to plug a bursting dam with one's fingers. It was a fool's errand. Instead, she began to map it. Her fingers typed, pulling up raw data streams, hexadecimal code scrolling past at a speed no normal person could read. But Eva's eyes tracked it, her mind processing it, seeing the patterns within the chaos. She wasn't just reading code. She was reading intent. "It's a ghost protocol," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "It doesn't break down the door. It mimics the key." She saw its logic. The virus wasn't a blunt instrument of destruction. It was an intelligence-gathering tool of exquisite sophistication. It had entered the system disguised as a routine diagnostic, learned the architecture, and then used Odin's own predictive algorithms to anticipate the system's defenses and stay one step ahead of them. Its primary goal wasn't to crash the base. It was to steal the Odin source code and take permanent, clandestine control of the facility's automated defenses. Now that she understood it, she could fight it. "Lieutenant Sharma," she said, her eyes never leaving the screen, "I need a hardline physical connection to the primary generator control room, bypassing the base network entirely. Now." Sharma, shaken from her stupor, didn't question the order. She ran to a communications panel and began barking orders into her headset, her voice now filled with a new, urgent purpose. "Sergeant Jensen," Eva continued. Her tone was not accusatory, but that of a master instructing an apprentice. "The firewall's authentication handshake. The original build, not the last 3 software patches. Find it on the backup server. Bring it to me on a hard drive. Do not connect that drive to any networked machine." Jensen, stunned but grateful for a concrete task, a way to redeem himself, nodded sharply. "Yes, ma'am," he scrambled away. Eva's fingers continued their quiet, relentless dance. She was not attacking. She was building. In a partitioned, sandboxed corner of the server, she began constructing a trap. She used the old, archaic code Jensen had sneered at, a language so fundamental that the modern, sophisticated virus wouldn't recognize its true nature. She wove a digital mirage, a virtual honeypot. She started building a perfect replica of the Odin core command node, the prize the virus was seeking. She had to make it irresistible. She used the original firewall handshake code Jensen brought her, making the trap look like an older, more vulnerable part of the system, a tempting and easy target. Then, she began to carefully, subtly alter the network pathways, rerouting the virus's main thrust away from the real command node and towards her digital phantom. It was the most delicate operation of her life, performed in the heart of a hurricane, with the fate of the base hanging on every single keystroke. Thorn and the others could only watch in silence as this unassuming woman they had dismissed and ignored waged a silent, invisible war on a battlefield they couldn't even see. The code on Eva's screen was a blur of green and black. She was laying the final bricks of her digital prison. The virus, sensing an undefended pathway to its prize, surged forward. It was an apex predator, intelligent and aggressive, and it saw what Eva wanted it to see. The vulnerable, unpatched core of the entire Odin system, ripe for the taking. On the main tactical display, the ominous black sigil representing the virus began to move. It detached from the FOB's network icon and shot toward the phantom node Eva had created. It was a shark striking at bait. "It's taking it," Sharma breathed, her eyes glued to the network topology map. The entire attack vector is shifting. The virus flooded into the honeypot. It began the process of copying the Odin core, a massive file of dummy code Eva had written, and simultaneously tried to assert control over the node's functions. Thought it had won. Eva's hands became still for a fraction of a second. "Now," she whispered. She typed a single, final command string and hit enter. It was not an attack command. It was an execution command. The virtual walls of the honeypot slammed shut, instantly severing the node from the rest of the network. The virus was trapped. But she didn't just quarantine it. The code she had built the trap with was a logic bomb, a Rostova paradox in its purest form. The virus, in trying to seize control of the node, had triggered a feedback loop. Its own aggressive intrusion protocols were reflected back at it, amplified. The program was forced to attack itself, its own code becoming the weapon of its destruction. On the screen, the trapped data began to corrupt, eating itself from the inside out in a cascade of digital self-immolation. But before the feedback loop completed its work, Eva performed one last action. For a precious few seconds, while the virus was ensnared but not yet destroyed, she had a clean trace on its origin. She initiated a deep-level signal analysis, bypassing the satellite relays and tracing the carrier wave itself. The attack wasn't coming from the simulated Red Team AI. It wasn't a glitch. It was a real-world intrusion, a hostile actor piggybacking on their encrypted uplink from thousands of miles away. The signal was heavily masked, routed through a dozen ghost servers in unfriendly nations, but the underlying quantum encryption signature, that was something she recognized. It was like seeing the brushstroke of a long-dead master painter, an old ghost from a different, colder war. She saved the trace data, a single line of coordinates and a timestamp, to a secure file. Then she allowed the logic bomb to finish its work. The black sigil on the main screen flickered, fractured, and disintegrated into nothing. The alerts on the control panels vanished. The klaxons sputtered and died. The oppressive red emergency lighting switched back to the cool, clinical blue of normal operations. Silence. The sudden, profound quiet was more shocking than the noise had been. The only sound was the low hum of the servers and the ragged breathing of the people in the room. Sergeant Jensen crept back to the console, staring at the lines of code Eva had left on the screen. He pointed a trembling finger. That's a legacy kernel command from the old Aegis network protocol. That system was decommissioned 20 years ago, before Odin, before I was even in high school. Nobody uses that language anymore. Eva turned in the chair, her expression calm, her face betraying nothing of the immense strain of the last few minutes. "It works," she said simply. Thorn, his face pale, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces, took a hesitant step forward. He looked at the restored screens, at his chastened staff, and finally at the woman who had single-handedly saved his command. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper. Who are you? Before Eva could answer, a high-priority communication alert chimed through the TOC speakers. It wasn't a networked call. It was coming through the hardline Sharma had established, a direct point-to-point link to the Pentagon. It's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Sharma announced, her voice filled with awe. Line 1, sir. Thorne, moving like a man in a dream, numbly pressed the button to put the call on speaker. The voice that filled the room was steel, laced with grave concern. Colonel Thorne, this is General McCaskill. We registered a massive ghost protocol attack on your sector's uplink. A signature we haven't seen in years. We were completely blind on our end. Report. Did it breach your system? Is Nightingale secure? Thorne opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Eva. He looked down at the simple visitor's ID still clipped to her shirt, the name that had meant nothing to him an hour ago. Rostova. He found his voice. It was hoarse, humbled. Negative, General. The FOB is secure. The threat was neutralized on sight. There was a long, charged pause on the other end of the line. The chairman had clearly expected a different answer. By whom, Colonel? My entire cyber command team couldn't even get a trace on the intrusion vector. Thorne took a deep breath. By a consultant, sir. Ms. E. Rostova. Another pause, this one longer, filled with a dawning realization that traveled across continents and down the secure line. When the chairman spoke again, his tone was utterly transformed. The steel was gone, replaced by something that sounded like profound relief and a deep, abiding respect. Ah, General McCaskill said, the single syllable carrying a world of meaning. So, Spectre is in the house. I should have known they'd send you. Colonel, listen to me very carefully. You are in the presence of General Eva Rostova, retired. She didn't just write the book on modern cyber warfare. She wrote the first damn chapter. The Aegis protocol Jensen was looking at? She designed it. The foundational architecture that your precious Odin is built on. That was her project. The Ghost protocol that just tried to gut your base. That was an enemy tactic she first identified and defeated over the skies of the Barents Sea in 1998. The countermeasure she just used is the very reason we still have a tactical advantage in the digital space. The chairman's words fell like hammer blows in the silent room. General. A 4-star general. Spectre. A call sign spoken only in whispers. A legend from the shadowy history of digital espionage. Lieutenant Sharma's jaw was literally slack. Sergeant Jensen looked as though he had just seen the face of God, and he had been caught mocking his creation. Colonel Thorne stared at Eva, the unassuming old woman, the bureaucratic fossil, the quiet observer. His mind struggled to reconcile the image with the legend he was now hearing. The dismissal, the condescension, the arrogance. It all came rushing back to him, leaving the bitter taste of shame in his mouth. The relic he had sent to a corner was the architect of his entire world. The atmosphere in the TOC underwent a chemical change. The air itself seemed to crackle with a new kind of tension, one born not of fear, but of profound, unadulterated respect. The casual slouch of the operators was gone. They sat or stood taller, their movements now precise and deferential. The smirks and whispers had evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed, silent awe. They weren't just looking at an old woman anymore. They were looking at a living monument. Colonel Thorne was the first to move. He drew himself up to his full height, his posture shifting from that of a superior addressing an inconvenience to a subordinate officer addressing a figure of immense authority. He executed a crisp, formal salute. General Rostova, he said, his voice clear and stripped of every last shred of its earlier arrogance. My profound apologies for the reception. This base and this command are yours. What are your orders? Eva met his gaze. She didn't return the salute. She was, technically, a civilian now, but she gave a short, sharp nod, accepting his contrition and his fealty in a single economical gesture. Her focus, however, was already moving past the apology. "The attack was a feint, Colonel," she said, her voice calm and analytical as she turned back to the main console. "A test. They were probing for weaknesses. They found them. Now they know we can see them, which means they'll change their tactics. This isn't over." She began issuing instructions. Her voice remained quiet, yet every word carried the weight of absolute authority. It was not the barked command of a man like Thorn, but the quiet, irresistible instruction of a master craftsman guiding her tools. "Sergeant Jensen," she began. Jensen practically leaped to attention. "Yes, General. The data packet I isolated in the honeypot. I want a full behavioral diagnostic. Do not attempt to decompile it. You'll trigger its anti-tampering defenses. I want you to observe it in the quarantine. Analyze its learning algorithm. I need to know how fast it adapts to new stimuli. That will tell us who we're dealing with." "Right away, General," Jensen said, his fingers flying across a fresh keyboard with a newfound, feverish dedication. This was no longer a job. It was a sacred duty. "Lieutenant Sharma." Sharma was already by her side, notebook in hand. "General, contact General McCaskill's office on the secure line. Inform them that Protocol Chimera is now in effect. My authorization is Spectre 01. Sharma's eyes widened. Protocol Chimera was the stuff of legend at the Academy, a theoretical contingency plan for a full-spectrum cyber/physical conflict, a war fought in servers and in the soil simultaneously. It had never been activated. The authorization code, Spectre 01, confirmed it all. She snapped a salute. "At once, General." Finally, Eva turned her attention back to Thorn. "Your wargame is over, Colonel. A real one just began. The intrusion wasn't just digital. A ghost protocol of that sophistication always has a physical component ready to activate. They were trying to seize your automated defenses for a reason. They were likely planning a follow-up strike. The virus has almost certainly left sleeper backdoors in your network, aimed at your power grid, your comms array, and your water purification systems." She pointed to the base schematic. "Your front line is no longer the perimeter fence. It's your generator room. It's your satellite uplink dish. We need to find those back doors before our adversary decides to use them." Thorn didn't hesitate or question. The man who had boasted of his predictive AI was now taking orders based on the gut instinct and hard-won experience of the woman he had so thoroughly misjudged. He became her instrument, her voice to the wider base. "You heard the General," he barked into the TOC's comm system, his voice ringing with a new, urgent clarity. "This is not a drill. I want engineering teams to do a full physical sweep of all primary utility conduits. Disconnect all non-essential systems from the network. I want double patrols on the comms array and the main power station. Move!" The entire base, which had been operating with the slick, detached confidence of a tech startup, was galvanized into the focused, gritty energy of a command under siege. The guards at the gate, the same young men who had made a general wait in the dust, were now scrambling to secure a hard perimeter, their movements sharp, their eyes scanning the horizon for a threat they now understood was both invisible and terrifyingly real. The respect for Eva Rostova spread from the TOC like a shockwave. It was in the way an engineer, passing her in a corridor, would press himself against the wall to give her space. It was in the way the analysts now brought her printouts of data, their expressions asking for approval, for guidance. They didn't just obey her. They watched her, trying to learn, trying to absorb some fraction of the quiet competence that radiated from her. The power in FOB Nightingale had shifted. It no longer resided in rank or title, but in the quiet, unassuming presence of the woman in the corner who saw the entire board, while everyone else was just looking at the pieces. The sun began its slow descent, painting the Alcatab expanse in hues of orange and violet. The frantic, high-stakes energy that had gripped FOB Nightingale for hours had subsided, replaced by the quiet, focused hum of a base that had faced annihilation and survived. The back doors had been located, 3 of them, hidden with devilish cleverness in the code for the mess hall's temperature control system, the automated refueling depot, and the septic maintenance network. All were now sealed. A new, more resilient defensive architecture, based on Eva's layered, paradox-driven principles, was being painstakingly implemented by a humbled and awestruck Sergeant Jensen. Eva stood alone near the western perimeter fence, the same spot where she had noticed the exposed conduit hours earlier. A team of engineers was now carefully reburying it, their work illuminated by portable floodlights. She was just a woman in simple civilian clothes again, the desert wind tugging at the loose strands of her hair. Her worn leather satchel sat on the dusty ground beside her feet. She looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun bled away, leaving the sky to the stars. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. Colonel Thorne approached, holding 2 battered tin mugs that steamed in the cooling air. He stopped beside her, not speaking for a long moment, simply following her gaze out into the deepening twilight. The silence was not awkward. It was a shared space of understanding. He offered one of the mugs to her. "Coffee," he said. It was all he said. Eva took it, her fingers wrapping around the warm metal. "Thank you, Colonel." They stood in companionable silence for another minute, the vastness of the desert night sky opening up above them. "The Rostova paradox," Thorne said finally, his voice quiet, almost reverent. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "They made us study it at the War College. A truly secure system is not one that believes itself to be impenetrable, but one that operates under the assumption that it has already been breached. It was a core tenet of modern defensive theory. I quoted it in papers. I lectured junior officers on it." He shook his head, a small, self-deprecating motion. "I read the words in a textbook. I never knew they belonged to a person." "It's just a principle, Colonel," Eva replied, her voice as soft as the wind. "Technology becomes obsolete. The hardware you prize today will be in a museum tomorrow. Principles are what endure." Thorne took a slow sip of his coffee. He thought of his blind faith in Odin, in the elegant, flawless machine. He had built a beautiful, impenetrable wall, never considering that the enemy was already inside, disguised as one of the builders. Eva hadn't built a wall. She had designed a landscape full of traps for those who did not belong. "I was arrogant," Thorne stated. It wasn't an apology this time, but a confession. A simple, factual admission. "I saw your age and I saw a liability. I didn't see the foundation on which I was standing. Arrogance is the first casualty of a real fight," Eva said without malice. "Now you know. That's what matters." A young soldier walked past on his patrol route. It was Corporal Davies, one of the guards from the main gate. He saw Colonel Thorne and the civilian consultant standing together. He slowed his pace, his eyes meeting Eva's for a brief, fleeting moment across the dusky ground. He remembered his bored, dismissive tone, the way he'd made her wait. A flush of shame crept up his neck. He was supposed to salute the colonel, but his attention was fixed on her. She was not in uniform. There was no protocol for this situation. So he invented one. He stopped, straightened his shoulders, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound, unvarnished respect, deeper and more meaningful than any reflexive salute. It was an acknowledgement from one soldier to another, a recognition of mastery that transcended rank, age, and uniform. A few yards away, another soldier on guard duty saw the exchange and mirrored the gesture. The silent signal began to pass between the men and women moving about the base in the twilight. A quiet, spreading consensus of respect. Eva held Davies's gaze for a second longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return. It was enough. She took a sip of the hot, bitter coffee. The warmth spread through her hands, a small, grounding comfort in the vast, cold desert. The immediate crisis was over, but the watch was not. Out there, in the darkness, her old adversary was adapting, learning from their failure. Another test would come. It always did. Her work was never done. She looked up at the first stars, pinpricks of ancient light in an infinite sky. This quiet moment of shared understanding, this silent acknowledgement under the watchful eyes of the constellations, was her only reward. And for General Eva Specter Rostova, it was more than enough.